Welcome to my Phase 5 Mage Guide for Season of Discovery. In this guide, we'll be going over everything you need to know to get you ready for those new raids, so let's jump right into it. For the Arcane talent, you're going to use this build. The only thing I want to mention is using Amp Magic on Razorgore. If you want to maximize your damage, you can spec 2 points into Magic Attunement to increase the effect of Amp Magic by 50%. I recommend taking the points out of Magic Absorption. The reason we're doing this is you can apply Amp Magic to Razorgore during the encounter while they're being mind controlled. This will provide an additional debuff for all of your caster DPS whenever you hit Phase 2. Everything else here is very standard and there's not really too much to talk about. For runes, the main rune you're going to be picking up now is the Spellfrost Bolt rune. We're going to be using the synergy of Deep Freeze and Fingers of Frost to get some extra DPS, as well as the Frozen Orb to Cold Snap and get a double Frozen Orb, lining that up with our new trinket from Zul'Gurub. For the Frost talents, it's very similar. You're going to follow this build on screen. Again, you can spec 2 points into Magic Attunement for that Razorgore encounter. And then of course, the runes are exactly the same as Arcane. If you want to have a little bit more survivability, play Frost as it's a lot safer since you have Ice Block and Ice Barrier. And for the Fire talents, this is the standard build that I recommend using. You can take some of the points out of Arcane and put them back into the Fire tree if you so choose to do so, but I recommend running this build for the most part. For the Fire runes, we're going to use the same exact runes as the last phase. The only thing we're going to talk about here is the Cloak rune. Highly recommend using Frozen Orb on Trash and using it on the Razorgore encounter. Since the Razorgore encounter is really only Phase 2 and the add phase doesn't really count, I recommend using Frozen Orb since you can Cold Snap and get a second Frozen Orb, yielding a lot more damage on average, rather than fishing for a Pyroblast proc using your Fire Blast. And for those wondering, yes, we will be using Burnout over Enlightenment. Regardless of what the Sims might be saying, Burnout is performing a bit better than Enlightenment. If this is to change, I'll be sure to update you guys in the pinned comments. So what spec do I recommend playing? I highly recommend playing Frost this phase. The downside of playing Arcane is you're required to have a Winter's Chill Mage in your group, or you're going to do the same DPS as a Frost Mage. The only downside of playing this is you're required to get that 5-piece CG set bonus. Without it, the spec is really not that good. For Fire, I think that this will be the more competitive spec at the end of this phase. If you really want to maximize your damage, play Fire, but again, you also need a Mage providing Winter's Chill, or Fire will not see those true DPS numbers that it can potentially reach. For gearing, I'll leave a link to all 3 best in slot lists in the description below. These links will contain the rotation, the talents, the runes, and of course the best in slot gear. If any of this information is to change, I'll be sure to update these lists and keep them relevant for you guys throughout this phase. If you have any questions about the gearing process or how to use the sim, feel free to reach out to me on Discord. I'd be happy to help you out. For macros and weak auras, I'll leave a link to my Discord that contains everything I currently use, and anything I add in the future, I'll be sure to share that as well. The 2 macros I highly recommend you go pick up for my Discord is the cooldown macro and the mana gem macro. They allow you to pop all of your cooldowns and then continue that primary rotation. In this case, I'm using Spellfrost Bolt as the example. Just change that line where it says cast Spellfrost Bolt to whatever spell you're currently using and you'll be good to go. The mana gem one operates in a similar way where it pops your highest spell rank of your mana gem to your lowest spell rank, and you don't have to worry about popping these individually. The main reason for these macros is to close that gap between your inputs. This will slowly add up over time if you aren't using a macro like this. For rotation, we're going to cover Frost and Arcane together since the only thing that's different is just the reapplying of the Ice Barrier for Frost. Before the pull, if you're the Frost Mage, be sure you're applying your Ice Barrier so you get the 100 extra Frost power from the Staff of Rime, and then just make sure you reapply it throughout the fight. From there, the rotation is identical, popping all your cooldowns, assumably when you get 5 stacks of Winter's Chill, popping your mana gems if you need the mana, using your Fingers of Frost procs on Deep Freeze of course, and then once that first Icy Veins expires, use your ZG trinket with Frozen Orb, and then Cold Snap to get a second Frozen Orb, taking benefit from that ZG trinket as well. After that, you're just going to rinse and repeat and follow the same rotation, and that's pretty much it. Whenever you get to the end of the fight, if you can't cast another spell, it's always better to try to use a Fire Blast or some kind of instant cast spell. For the Fire rotation, we're going to assume that you're the only Fire Mage. You're going to use the Staff of Inferno so that you can Blast Wave on the pull, that way you can apply 5 stacks of Scorch instantly. After that, you're going to pop all of your cooldowns, and then you're going to cast 3 to 4 Balefire Bolts depending on the fight duration. Ideally, you're casting 4. Use Fire Blast on CD, and whenever you get those Hot Streak procs, be sure to spin them on Pyroblast. This next step only applies to you if you have your 6-piece tier 2, but this will be called Flame Weaving. All you need to know is you cast it after your initial Balefire Bolt opener, and then you just reapply this whenever you see that your fireball has 3 seconds left on the dot. And that's it. After that, you're going to go into a filler rotation of spamming Frost Firebolt until you can cast Balefire Bolt again. And that's pretty much the entire rotation. At the end of the fight, of course, I have to mention, if you can't cast another spell, it's always better to try to use a Fire Blast, just anything instant to give yourself a little bit more DPS. For your AoE rotation, it's very simple this phase. Use Frozen Orb on CD, use Blast Wave on CD, use Arcane Explosion as much as possible since that's going to be a big chunk of your damage this phase. Don't put that much priority on Living Bomb this phase, as most of the trash dies so quickly that you're not getting a huge benefit from Living Bombing everything. This will obviously depend on your raid environment, but for the most part the trash seems to die very quickly, so I would put more priority on the spell vulnerability mobs, as this will be where a lot of your damage comes from. For buffs and consumes, we'll use the major mana potions, demonic runes, or dark runes. Alternatively, you can just use your mana gem, as this does share a cooldown with it. We're always going to run the Flask of Supreme Power, and we're always going to run the Weapon Imbue Brilliant Wizard Oil. For food buffs, we're going to use the Run Tum Tuber, and the Dragon Breath Chili I don't recommend, as it is such a small DPS increase. For elixirs, we're going to run the Greater Arcane Elixir, and if you're playing Fire, you're going to run the Greater Firepower Elixir, and for Frost and Arcane, you will run the Frost Power Elixir. Additionally, you can bring the Mage Blood Potion for some additional MP5, and then the rest of these miscellaneous buffs are pretty optional. The one I recommend you bring out of all of them is going to be the Juju Ember, as this will help you resist some of those flame buffet stacks on Firemaw. The Elixir of Coalesce Regret just gives you an additional 1 to all of your stats. The Mage Scrolls are really tedious to farm, but if you have some of these lying around, I recommend using them. And then the Blasted Lands buff provides you with an additional 25 int, and this does stack with your Arcane Intellect. Lastly, if you have any profession consumes, make sure that you're using them, the Enchanting Sigils and then the potions for alchemy. These two professions are still the best at the moment. The rest of this goes without saying, but make sure that you have all of your debuffs within your raid, bringing all of the world buffs that you can, making sure that you're fully buffed on the pole, using Molten Armor if you're Arcane or Frost, and using Mage Armor if you're Fire. If you have any PIs or Innervates, make sure you set up a Whisper macro so you can get these efficiently. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed this mage guide, I'll be making more mage guides like this in the future. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos just like this. Comment down below what you'd like to see next, and as always, I will see you in the next one.